In the heart of Chicago, Sarah's split-second prejudice left her drenched in guilt as she rejected a kind black taxi driver. Hours later, his cab saved her life from a speeding car, forcing her to confront the weight of her bias. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned hearts. But let's start from the beginning. In the bustling heart of Chicago, the city buzzed with its characteristic energy, despite the relentless rain pounding the streets. Sheets of water poured from the sky, drenching sidewalks and turning the roads into glistening mirrors. Neon signs reflected on the wet pavement, their colors smeared by the downpour. People hurried along, umbrellas bumping into each other, shoes splashing through puddles, and muttered curses lost to the rhythm of the storm. The evening rush hour was in full swing, compounding the chaos. Taxis darted through the streets like yellow streaks, their lit roof signs slicing through the gray haze. Car horns blared, the cacophony mixing with the hiss of rain and the soft slap of windshield wipers fighting against the deluge. On the corner of a busy intersection, Sarah stood with a leather briefcase clutched in one hand and her smartphone in the other. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching pencil skirt, her hair styled to perfection, though the humidity was starting to loosen the once crisp waves. Her heels clicked impatiently on the pavement as she shifted her weight, craning her neck to scan the traffic. The stress on her face was unmistakable. She checked her watch for what felt like the 100th time. Sarah was late, again. Tonight's dinner was critical, a rare opportunity to impress a client whose account could single-handedly secure her promotion. The mounting pressure gnawed at her composure, and she waved frantically at passing taxis, her movements growing more desperate with each minute. Finally, a cab veered toward the curb, its tires spraying a fine mist. The vehicle stopped just in front of her, and she instinctively stepped back to avoid the splash. Its windshield wipers worked overtime, struggling to keep the glass clear of the downpour. The driver rolled down his window slightly and leaned over to unlock the door. Marcus, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, wore a weathered leather jacket and a neatly trimmed beard flecked with gray. His voice was friendly, yet professional, as he said, "Where to, ma'am?" Sarah froze, gripping the strap of her briefcase a little tighter. Her gaze darted toward him, taking in his face, and then quickly looked away. Her polished exterior cracked just for a moment, betraying the hesitation swirling inside her. Her pulse quickened. She glanced over her shoulder at the rain-slicked street, as though another taxi might miraculously appear. The seconds stretched unbearably as Marcus waited, his expression neutral, but his eyes quietly observing. "I'm waiting for someone," Sarah said finally, her voice firm but laced with awkwardness. Her words felt heavy in the damp air, and she stepped back under the building's awning as if to emphasize her lie. Marcus hesitated just long enough to show he understood what she really meant. Without a word, he nodded and drove off, the cab merging back into traffic. Standing there, rain dripping from the awning above her, Sarah's chest tightened. Guilt pricked at her thoughts. She told herself she had reasons, logical, rational reasons, but they felt thin even as she replayed them. Minutes later, another cab finally pulled up. This time Sarah climbed in immediately, barely glancing at the driver. As the car sped toward her destination, the driver took a sharp turn, and the tires screeched loudly against the wet asphalt. Sarah's stomach lurched as the car briefly skidded before straightening out. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Sorry about that," the driver muttered, shrugging it off. Sarah forced herself to nod, but her hands gripped her briefcase tighter. As she stared out the rain-streaked window, she tried to dismiss the encounter, chalking up the uneasy feeling to her usual pre-meeting nerves. But something about the squeal of the brakes and the memory of Marcus's quiet resignation stayed with her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. The dinner meeting was a disaster. Sarah sat at the long, elegantly set table, surrounded by colleagues and potential clients, but her mind was elsewhere. She barely tasted the salmon on her plate, or registered the wine being poured. The nagging memory of her earlier hesitation, her quick judgment of Marcus, clung to her thoughts, dampening her ability to engage every time she tried to focus on the conversation. A pang of guilt crept in, distracting her and making her contributions feel forced and hollow. The clients exchanged polite smiles as the dinner drew to a close, but Sarah could sense that she hadn't made the impression she'd hoped for. By the time she left the restaurant, the rain had eased into a light drizzle, and the city was cloaked in the reflective glow of wet pavement and streetlights. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, but the chill in the air seemed to seep into her bones, mirroring the unease she felt inside. Crossing the street, her heels clicked on the slick pavement. Her thoughts swirled with self-recrimination, replaying the meeting, the missed opportunities, and that moment earlier when she had chosen not to step into Marcus's cab. Suddenly, headlights pierced the darkness, bearing down on her. A car sped toward the intersection, its engine roaring as it ran a red light. The world seemed to slow, and Sarah froze in place, her eyes wide with terror. The realization that she couldn't move hit her as hard as the oncoming danger, and she braced herself for impact, her breath caught in her throat. Out of nowhere, a taxi screeched to a halt in front of her, its horn blaring like a siren. The driver's door flew open, and Marcus leapt out, racing to her side. His strong hands grabbed her arm and yanked her back onto the sidewalk, just as the speeding car swerved, narrowly missing them both. The vehicle disappeared into the night with a distant roar, leaving nothing behind but the acrid smell of burned rubber. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but laced with urgency. Sarah stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Her heart thundered in her chest, her knees wobbled, and the adrenaline rushing through her veins made it hard to speak. I'm fine," she stammered, though her trembling hands betrayed her words. As she looked up at Marcus, her breath hitched. It was him, the same driver she had refused earlier that evening. Recognition flickered across Marcus's face, too, but he said nothing, his eyes steady and full of concern. Sarah's embarrassment rushed in like a tidal wave, coloring her cheeks a deep red. Her earlier prejudice came crashing down on her, its weight heavy and inescapable. The man she had dismissed without a second thought had just risked his safety to save hers. "Thank you," she managed, her voice small and unsteady. She couldn't meet his eyes, the shame of her earlier behavior burning through her. Marcus nodded. "Just glad you're okay," he said simply, his tone devoid of judgment. As the rain continued to fall softly around them, Sarah felt something inside her shift. For the first time that day, she wasn't just preoccupied. She was humbled. She realized in that moment how easily she had let assumptions cloud her judgment, and how profoundly wrong she had been. Once Sarah composed herself, Marcus insisted on giving her a ride home. Reluctantly, she agreed, feeling a mix of shame and gratitude. As the cab glided through the city, they began to talk. Marcus shared his story. A former teacher, he had turned to driving to support his family after the school he worked for was shut down. He spoke about his pride in his community and his frustration with the everyday biases he faced. Sarah, initially defensive, began to open up. She admitted that she had judged him earlier and confessed to her own struggle with recognizing her implicit biases. "You were scared," Marcus said with a shrug. "I see it all the time, but fear doesn't justify shutting people out." Her shame deepened, but so did her determination to change. By the time they reached her apartment, Sarah felt a connection to Marcus that transcended the circumstances. She offered to pay him double the fare as a thank you, but he refused. "I didn't stop to save you for money," Marcus said, his tone kind but firm. "I stopped because it was the right thing to do. Maybe next time you'll see a person instead of a stereotype." Sarah nodded, tears stinging her eyes. That night, she stayed up reflecting on her actions and resolved to confront her biases actively. The next morning, she contacted a local community group focused on racial equity, volunteering her time and resources to help. Sarah knew that her transformation wouldn't erase her past mistakes, but it was a step toward understanding and justice. Meanwhile, Marcus continued driving, his quiet strength a testament to resilience. He had long accepted the challenges of his life, but small victories, like seeing someone like Sarah begin to change, gave him hope for a better future.